My next guest on the Quantum Shift podcast is a gentleman that goes by the name Brian Penny. He is the author of this book called Bonus Time. I do talk about how I came across this book in the beginning of the podcast, but I'll reiterate the story here. A colleague of mine, Emmett, Irish guy, was running with me when I was spending some time in Berlin and recommended the book. I couldn't get a hold of the book when I went back to the United States. He bought the book for me, sent it over to me, and I was gobsmacked by the raw truth and grit of what Brian had been through in very serious addiction to heroin, of all things, and how he came out the other end, earned his PhD, is a neurologist, studies the brain, does incredible work through his blog Change is Possible and his podcast Change is Possible. I will link all of those details underneath the video, but this is a special guy. He also filmed a documentary called Hooked that only aired in the UK, unfortunately, but he also has some other content that I'm going to share because I think it's really important for all of us in the US to get to know Brian. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of personal triumph. It's a story of dealing with inner conflict and overcoming that and changing your mindset and how to approach life. Tremendously inspiring guy. I spent an hour and a half picking his brain, and I really, really hope you enjoy this podcast. I loved talking to Brian. Episode 2 of the Quantum Shift podcast. Brian Penny. All right. So firstly, Brian, welcome to the Quantum Shift podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. For those who are listening, Brian is the author of Bonus Time, which was recommended to me by a former colleague of mine, Emmett Malay, who I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Emmett. I apologize if I did not. An Irishman whom I had met while in Berlin, Germany, and I was doing a 1-month onboarding for a company called Products Up, plug for Products Up. And at the time I was training for a marathon, and Emmett and I were talking about fitness and how he was really into fitness. And I mentioned to him that I had to train over the weekend. And I said, hey, dude, I got to run 13.2 miles this weekend, basically a half marathon. You want to join? And he was just like, sure, I'm up for it. Crazy Irishman.
Love that. Love that.
Ran a half marathon with me throughout Berlin. And of course, destroyed me because he was, much younger than I am and super fit. But over the course of the time that we were running through Berlin, we were swapping stories about self-help and about reading. We're both voracious readers. And he mentioned this book to me and he's like, listen, trust me on this one. You got to read it. And then I got home, went back to the States. So this is, I guess the timeline was it was October of 2019. I want to talk to you about that as well, because I tried to order it in the US and I couldn't get it. And then Emmett had to buy it for me in Europe and then send it to me. And then I just started passing it out among all my friends who were absolutely blown away by it. That's how how I came to know about you. Yeah. And I'm super excited for people within my ecosystem to learn about you. And this isn't even my copy, because I've given away my copy to friends, which is, I think, is super cool, right?
I love that. Passing on a good book. I love that.
Yeah. So let's, people, if in the United States that don't know who you are, I'm going to let you start where you want to start. Can you just give us 30,000 foot view? Who's Brian?
Who is Brian? Right. That's the eternal question we can never answer. I'll give you a little bit of a description, I suppose. So I was someone who struggled massively with trauma. I had an operation as a baby without a general anesthetic, and that set me up for a life of pain of my own in our body. And I ended up dabbling
Without
in
general, is
drugs.
that like a normal thing? I saw your keynote where you
Yeah.
mentioned that. That seemed like it was standard back then. Is that true?
That was the practice pre-1980, and it was only when an American woman found out her baby had open heart surgery without a general anesthetic that she freaked out. Yeah, crazy. And the medical practice just looked around and says, oh my God, what have we been doing? They were basing this on weak neurological evidence from the 90s that infants did not experience pain. Now, what we know about trauma work and research today, that infants certainly express pain, feel pain, express pain, and the body keeps the score, as that great book tells us. So internally for me, I believe that was the essence of me becoming a finely tuned anxiety machine. And I grew up with my parents, great parents. They're so lovely. They love me so much, but they had their own issues with alcohol. And through my trauma and my anxiety, I was always worrying. I had this intense bodily agitation. I just never felt happy in my own skin. I had this uh, phobic fear of my heartbeat, breath, my pulse. And when I start trying drugs at 14, 15 years of age, it just gave me a sense of safety. Like I felt a little bit safer. And I tried heroin for the first time when I was 16 years of age. And it just gave me such a feeling of peace. And I often say it brought me to heaven in that moment. It quickly brought me to hell, but it made me feel soft, secure, and comforted for the first time in my life. And that really set me off on a journey of addiction where I spent 35 years, not 35 years, until I was 35 years of age. And then I suppose that the second part of the story, the book Bonus Time, is called Bonus Time because I believe I'm living on bonus time. I was given a second chance at life. So I had a near death experience at the age of 35 that completely shifted my perspective. And we can jump back into this, Chris, if you want to jump back into individual bits. But it was
Yeah.
like I nearly switched addictions. I went from my dopamine hooks into heroin, and I was bitten by the bug of life, the human mind. And I just went on this journey exploring the human mind, which led to a PhD in neuroscience and psychology. But I've just been on this lust for learning journey ever since. I just love learning about the human mind. And I suppose sharing my lived experiences and my academic expertise to help others to change. That's who I am, I suppose.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard this, but it has to be one of the most profound turnarounds for a human being in history. I mean, to go from heroin addiction to your PhD, to study the brain and to travel the world and to speak the way that you do and to, have your podcast and be on television and have these opportunities. So you talk about your anxiety and how it was part of your DNA and you as an infant. That information, was that something that came to you while you were studying and you're like, oh, this makes sense now. My anxiety came from what was going on in my life at the time and being operated on as an infant, and like what was it that made that bulb go off?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it was only when I was writing my book that I really dug into the depths of what was going on. Like it was in 2013 when I found recovery, and I began a little bit of the search of the human mind, but I wasn't really going into the depths of trauma. That hadn't reached my sphere of interest at that moment. And I suppose when I was writing my book, that it was a memoir. So I was looking at the start of my journey to the end of the journey, my whole life. And I always knew I had an operation as a baby, but I understood the specifics of it. And when I was speaking to my mom about this, she was telling me about the operation. And I don't know where I found out about the research around that, but anecdotally, I was always afraid of the scar on my belly. Like I've done lots of trauma work. I'm very secure in my own body, in my own skin today. But anytime I talk about that trauma, I still feel a little bit of an urge to rub the scar on my belly. That's over 45 years later. Like the body keeps the score. It's an imprint. It's
Crazy.
so I knew it was there subconsciously, but on a conscious level, I only started delving into it in 2020, and I really dug deep into the research. I've talked to surgeons. Like I found out I would have been put on this crucifix style apparatus to stop my legs and arms squirming on the operating theatre. I would have been given ethanol on a soother to pacify me when they inserted the scalpel in my belly. Now, I would have been given a local anesthetic, Chris, so a local anesthetic for the area, but I was awake during the operation.
Oh my goodness.
Crazy, crazy.
Okay. So, and I'm going to end up jumping around here. I've got a list of so many questions, but you're triggering all these different things. You started heroin at 16. To me, that's like, wow, that's young. How could you like explain to the audience, like, obviously in the book, you talk about it was a progression, right? Like it didn't start like, hey, I'm going to heroin, right? This is where I'm
No.
going. but was your road to heroin in your mind an inevitable thing in order to alleviate that anxiety that you feel like you would have eventually just gotten there no matter what? Or was it environmental, like a nature versus nurture type of thing? What do you think it was?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that it's really hard to go back, and I wish I could go back in my mind now into my body to know exactly how I was feeling. But the reality is I wasn't aware I had anxiety. We didn't have that language back then. And I was just agitated and nervous and I worried a lot. And to be quite honest, a lot of people in my family and my friends were very similar. And I thought everyone just felt like I did. And it was only when I started dabbling in drugs, like I was good in school, I was good at football, soccer for the US, and I had high hopes of having a good life. And I remember like my friends start smoking cigarettes and I thought they were stupid. Why would you smoke cigarettes? It's so bad for your health. But when I was 14, I remember one of my friends saying, "Oh, you get a great head buzz off that." And that piqued my interest. "Oh, what's a head buzz?" And maybe it was the age I was at. I was curious about drugs. I'm not sure. But I says, "Well, I'll never smoke, but I'll try a little head buzz. Give us a little puff of that. And I'll try this once and that's it." And I tried it and I liked the head buzz. And then my friends and people around me, they were smoking cannabis. There was no weed back then. It was more cannabis resin. So I started smoking hash. I started taking tablets, messing around with different drugs. And we ended up sort of as a group getting into this drug fueled, taking tablets, taking acid, smoking cannabis. And we were big into Jim Morrison and the Doors. We adored Jim Morrison. And
There,
is
there's
there
the Morrison painting back there. I don't
no
know if you
way. Oh,
yeah,
we
but
were
like
we
right
were
there.
obsessed. We
High
used to
five, man.
celebrate his birthday and the anniversary of his death. And every Friday in my friend's house, we'd smoke hash around the table with the Doors playing and the music and the
Yeah,
candles and the smoke. It was mesmerizing when I think back on
yeah.
it. But Jim Morrison said you should try everything once. And Jim, of
Mm.
course, tried heroin. So he says, "Jim, we'll try heroin once. We'll do it for you." I'm not blaming Jim Morrison. We did have a choice. But I said I'd do heroin once. But I described that first night doing heroin in the book. I think I called the chapter Falling in Love, and I dedicated a whole chapter to it because it just brought this softness, this quietness. It's like Pink Floyd got that song so right, Comfortably Numb. That's what I was.
Yeah.
And for the first time in my life, I felt safe and soft as I drifted away into a heroin comatose. And it didn't I wasn't addicted from that very first go because I had lofty goals. I was going to go out and attack the world. I had plans. Heroin had me from that very first moment because I was doing it once a week. I thought I had the secret. I was telling lies to myself. I thought everyone else was stupid because why would you not do heroin once a week when you can still live a normal life? But that's turned into twice a week. Then it turned into doing it on a Monday and a Tuesday. And me and my best friend, it just hooked us in. We didn't realize it had us in its grip, in its grips like a vice, but it slowly pulled us in before it was too late. And at 20 years of age, I was fully addicted to heroin every day.
All right. So this is, I'm glad you brought up the sort of high functioning that you were able to pull off because reading the book and you do a phenomenal job of like, I'm with you there. Like you're working at that agency and then you're in the bathroom and you're sweating and you're dealing with all of these issues. I've been hungover at work,
Yeah.
as I'm sure a lot of people have, and that was awful. And I was like, I'm not going to do that again. How on earth were you able to pull off the once a week on heroin and actually like you functioned and it was a very high level? Like you had a white collar job. You're using your brain. You're
Yeah.
interacting with people on a daily basis. You're having
Yeah.
conversations. You have to be engaged in the conversations. You couldn't be falling back on a bed and just like lapsing into a coma for 5 hours. How did you pull it off?
Yeah, I think the key element of that is that like I didn't have a heroin problem. I didn't have a drug problem. It was a symptom of an underlying problem. So I was always really trying to numb, trying to medicate myself so I could feel okay. And I think people get confused by that. They think people in deep addiction are trying to get high all the time. They're just trying to feel normal, feel okay to a certain extent. So I was nearly using drugs. Like I worked in the graphics industry for a big pharma company, ironically designing methadone and anti-anxiety medication, a very ironic part of my journey. But I was just using enough drugs while I was in work to take the edge off because my job funded my addiction. Now, in the latter stages or mid stages, I start selling drugs to fund my addiction because my habit grew so much. But I was a functional addict for a long time. And I think people get confused by that. They think of the train spotting style addict on the streets.
Right,
But
right, right.
so
Yeah.
many people in addiction hold down full-time jobs. Addiction thrives in secrecy. The addiction itself, the ego of addiction, tries to keep itself alive by keeping it in secrecy so it can hold on to the addiction. So you will weave and craft and narrate stories that you will believe yourself to keep that addiction alive. And that's how I done it. Like I remember Gabor Mate of all people. I'm name dropping a bit here, but
No,
I
I'm
done
so glad you brought it up. Yeah.
I done the documentary with Gabor and the one in Ireland. And Gabor said to me, he says, I don't want to offend you, says, but you were a sensational addict of how I held it together. I says, that's a high compliment from Gabor, even if it's a bit of a different
Yeah.
kind of compliment, you know?
Bit of a left-handed compliment. Yeah, you were a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
masterful addict. So, but I mean, obviously you've studied the brain, you're studying the brain as a neurologist and going around the world speaking to, you mentioned earlier that you've been going to jails, etc. Can you spot it? Can you, in your daily life, are you walking around and you're just like addict, addict? Can you see heroin on people? Because, I joke around with my daughters. I'm in New York, in the suburbs of New York right now, but I used to go into the city every day and bring the girls into the city. And I would point out what, methadone addicts, like you could spot them. There's, not a lot of teeth. There's a certain
Yeah.
look, a drawn look about their face, and their skin looks like tissue paper thin. And I would teach my girls to spot that and be like, what do you think? And they're like, oh yeah, definitely drugs. Can you see you interacted with high functioning addicts? You don't have to name names or anything, but where you're just like, there's something going on with that person. Like, do you feel like it's almost like your own inner radar type of thing?
Yeah, do you know what? If they're a high functioning addict and they're still functioning at a high level, I think that element of functioning would demonstrate that you would not see that because that's the
Yeah.
function in itself. Because the
Right.
function of the behavior is to hide it, that way. But you would see, like, it's very hard to, especially like if you see someone on the streets, if you see someone that's really down and out and is just using copious amount of drugs to numb that pain, like it's very evident physically,
Yeah.
ethically, like they wouldn't be washing themselves because it's just not a priority anymore. I think I went over a year without having a proper shower at one stage. It's just not the priority. So that's very obvious. I'd give you a funny story with that. I remember
I was
reading
gonna
an
say, is
article
that,
one time.
yeah, tell me about that. I'm like,
Yeah.
wait.
So I remember reading an article one time because it was so difficult to get a shower. All I wanted to do, I was trying to work and I was barely holding down a job at this stage. I had to go and get drugs and I just hadn't got energy to have a shower. And I remember like I barely brushed my teeth. It got really bad. But I read an article one time where Brad Pitt said that he uses baby wipes when he doesn't want to have a shower. Now, what I sort of left out of the equation was that Brad Pitt also had showers. It was just the odd time if he felt a bit dirty, he used the baby wipe. But I seen if Brad Pitt doesn't have showers, I don't have to have
Who
showers.
needs
I'll just
showers?
use baby wipes. Yeah. Now, I'm probably exaggerating saying a year, but I went weeks without showering. Like I really did and just kept the smell away with baby wipes. But it got to that level. But when it comes to people that are high functioning, it's very difficult to tell if someone is lying unless you're close to them and you can sniff those little changes in personality, changes, very nuanced, subtle changes in people. So this is what makes addiction really difficult. It thrives in secrecy. The person in addiction will really be secretive and be very good at keeping those secrets. And it's only over time that you can really see those challenges, I think.
And probably lying to themselves. I'm sure you were lying to yourself and
Yes,
saying, I can
that's
handle
what
this.
makes them so good. Yeah.
Yeah, you shared a lot of that in the book. So I was going to jump to the night in 2013, seizure in the hospital, but I want to tack something on to that because I wanted to ask you, like, what's the first thing you remembered when you opened your eyes in the hospital? And if you could share the story of the seizure. I know it's intense and kind of graphic,
Yeah.
but I'd love for you to recount it for the audience. But then I'm also curious about the people in your life. Like you had colleagues at work that were friends. You had people that
Yeah.
were in your life. Your parents were in your life. Did it ever come up where they were like, something else is going on here? Or was it just something that was repressed and just like, oh, he's hungover and, maybe he's had too many things to drink. So those two things.
Yeah. What I would say, and this was the same for in work and at home, that it was so relentless and so grinding, and the changes were so slow that there wasn't this big jump where people jumped in and said it. So over and over, my mom would say, "What are you doing? What are you going to get yourself together?" They all knew, but like I was always saying, they knew I was on methadone. They knew I take tablets, but I was always saying I don't do heroin anymore. And of course, I was doing heroin every single day. But I was always saying I'm trying to reduce my methadone. I created these narratives and these stories to keep people away. I remember my former counselor calling me. What did he say? He said, "I take out this machine gun of verbal diarrhea and I'd walk away feeling exhausted listening to you." So I had this ability to keep people away with words, and people were just exhausted. So it was very hard to penetrate that, and it was nearly pointless in anyone saying anything to me. And in the workplace, it was my boss sort of inherited me as a problem, and he was a really good friend. And it was only when we merged with another company that this other company were in this big open plan office. And it was only these new people, because all of a sudden they came in and just seeing this person. At this stage, I could barely function. I was barely staying awake for 8 hours. I was falling asleep at my desk. And people were saying, "What's the story with that fella? Like, what's actually going on here? How is he? He's working in the pharma industry." So I quickly got into trouble in the workplace and I lost my job. And that was sort of the catalyst for a succession of things that happened in quick succession that created this change, this shift in perspective that I had. But as you said, it came through a lot of pain. So I basically lost my job, no way of funding my addiction anymore. And I quickly realized, right, I'm going to have to try to get out of this mess. Like I was forced to face this challenge for the first time. And I realized as well, I don't know how cognitively aware of this I was, but I just knew the drugs were just not working anymore. Like they were not doing the job that they once did. They were certainly not a solution. They weren't medicating, they weren't numbing, they were making my mental health worse, not better. It was very obvious. So I was really trapped and I had to do something different. So for the first time in my life, I sort of said, right, I think I'm gonna have to get off drugs. Even though I didn't believe I could live in the world, I didn't think I could cope with anxiety without drugs, but I had to try it. I had to try something different. So I went to a detox. I went to the clinic where I was a registered addict for 12 years. And I said, "Look, gonna try to break free. What do I do?"
Mm.
And they told me that I would have to do not only one detox, I'd have to do a double detox. I'd have to get off benzodiazepine first and alcohol. And when they were out of my system, I could do a secondary detox to get off opiates. And that's because I was at risk of having a seizure. So they hadn't got the facilities where I was going to do this full biological detox. I had to sort of do a bit of a cold turkey off the drugs, which was very, very dangerous. But what preceded that, when they went to get me a bed at a benzo detox. So I think I'm not 100% sure. I think if I went to a proper benzo detox, they would have weaning me off the benzodiazepine, but there was no bed available for up to 3 months. And I was in a really bad place at this time, Chris. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I can't wait 3 months. I don't think I'll even be alive in 3 months.
You
I
won't
was in
survive.
such a bad place. And I decided to do a benzo detox at home on my own. And for people wondering what benzodiazepine are, they're Valium, Xanax, Roach. That's the branding of those. So 2 nights into that detox, was not only the most painful night of my life, it was also the most important night of my life. And I woke up on my sitting room floor and there was blood everywhere. And I had a very violent grand mal convulsive seizure. And it turned out I my brother James actually, he was minding me as I was going through the withdrawals, and we were watching Breaking Bad of all things at the time. I don't think I had that in the book actually, did I? Yeah, the two of us were sitting in the
The irony.
I know. We were sitting in the sitting room watching Breaking Bad. And my brother James describes it that I just sort of slid off the sofa, but he said it looked really bizarre. The way I slid off the sofa was just weird looking. And he looked over and I was sort of just shaking on the ground. He says I was like a fish out of water, nearly slipping a little bit off the ground. And he obviously panicked. He's a lovely, sensitive soul. He really is a gorgeous human being. And he panicked. He ran over. My eyes were rolling in the back of my head. He didn't know what was going on. I was having a violent seizure. And what happens at the end of a seizure? There's a slump. But the 2 or 3 minutes while I was pulsing and convulsing, literally every neuron in my brain firing at the same time, I was driving my teeth up into my tongue, really jamming them into my tongue through the convulsions. And just before I slumped, I split my tongue. And when I slumped on the ground, there was blood coming out of my mouth. My brother James thought I was dead. My dad tells the story of James screaming down the phone, Brian's dead, Brian's dead. But thankfully, I wasn't dead. And thankfully, I have superheroes as a family, Chris. I have so much to thank my family for in terms of, because I burned them for years through my addiction, like the things I done, the scarring that I left on them. But they all rallied around me in my time of need. They came up to the house, got me an ambulance, and brought me across to a hospital nearby. And it was when I came to that moment that you talked about. I remember coming around in the hospital and I was lying on a trolley in a room. It was the middle of the night and it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was an absolute shell of a human being, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I didn't know what that word was at the time, but I was spiritually broken. Shell of a human being. And I never wanted to escape my reality more than I did in that moment. And that's the essence of addiction, escape and avoid. But I haven't got the strength to get drugs. I just had to sit in this shit. Like I had to sit with this emotion, with this physical pain that like a bag of needles in my mouth from biting my tongue. It was just horrific. And I remember staring at this red fire extinguisher that was hanging on the wall. I'll never forget it. This red fire extinguisher on the wall. And I had this weird realization that I didn't know what this object was. And it was bizarre in a sense because I knew everyone knew what a fire extinguisher was. I knew I should have known what it was. I knew this object, but I couldn't bring it to mind. It was like something was broken, something was disconnected. And I remember just freaking out, saying, what's going on? What's wrong with my brain? And looking around the rest of the room, trying to label my environment. And I realized that something was broken. My mind was not working. And I remember thinking in that moment, saying, oh my God, that's brain damage. You've destroyed your brain. Game over. There is no coming back from this. And I remember just leaning back on the trolley, utterly defeated. I'd nothing left to give. I'd no more fight between the anxiety, the addiction, the grinding of the addiction over so many years, seizure, and now I'm brain damaged. I just have nothing left. I says, you win, I'm done. And I lay back down on the trolley, waiting to be overwhelmed by panic, fear, anxiety, my old foes. But instead, I felt a sense of peace. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like the fight was over. And I didn't have the language at the time, but it was like a moment of acceptance, a moment of surrender, a moment of letting go. And I truly believe, Chris, that that was the moment that shifted my entire life. That gave me the chance to change and look at life in a different way. It was that the acceptance and the surrender of that moment.
Whoa. I know you talk about it in the book. It's so much more powerful hearing it from you. And I have so many questions. When you talk about, I mean, obviously, like that's your rock bottom, and you talk about your surrendering. What were you fighting? Like fighting against, like just trying to temper the anxiety that you felt all the time. And what did
Yeah.
you like when you said you let go? Was it just, in recoveries, like let go, let God, that sort of
Yeah.
mentality? I'm curious about your spirituality. Are you spiritual? Was there a base of faith? Like, were you just kind of like, hey, God, either I'm gone or I'm done with this? Like, it's going to be one or the other. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think back, and again, my brain was so scrambled then. I'm often thinking, am I trying to put logic on what happened, or how
Right.
can I describe it? Like, so when I think of spirituality, I think of energy, awareness, connection. They're the words that come up for me. And I'd been a big proponent or a big fan of the Tao Te Ching, Taoism
Yeah.
philosophy. And Taoism describes that the Tao is the way. But those who know don't say, those who say don't know. So if I tell you what I think it is, I don't
Yeah.
really know it. But
I got
let's
it.
just try it. Let's just try
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But for me, anxiety for me, predominantly, it was my head in terms of overthinking and worrying and projecting. My mind was just compulsively thinking all of the time. But it manifested itself physically in my chest. When I felt anxiety, it was like the squeezing sensation. I remember I used to be driving to work and I'd get there and I'd be like a clamp, just sort of tightening my chest and my arms, gripping the steering wheel. And I used to nearly hug myself trying to squeeze the anxiety away or get away from the anxiety in my chest. So it was very physical for me. And the thinking was a huge part of it. Like, am I gonna get anxious? Am I gonna have a panic attack? And those fears and those worries were ironically fueling the panic and the anxiety. So it was very circular. And I think the letting go moment for me where I gave up, I can't really completely put into words, but just, it's like I just started breathing again. I was just like, right, I stopped resisting reality because I had anxiety. I had a tightness in my chest, but I wasn't trying to use drugs anymore. I knew the drugs didn't work, so I stopped trying to control it and I just let it be. So it didn't go away. I just let it be. I let it sit there and let it be there. And I describe that moment as the catalyst. That's the moment that everything completely changed. But 3 weeks after that, I had a couple of other seizures. I had another couple of hospital visits. Was something I just knew I'd never do drugs again. And I was so broken from those experiences that I wasn't trying to get drugs. I wasn't trying to fight. I was just a shell. I was an absolute shell of a human being. I had nothing else, nothing left to give. But when I start getting a little bit of strength back again, and I went to do the 6 week opiate detox. It was a little farm on the outskirts of Dublin. And I should have been full of fear and anxiety going to get off heroin from a 15-year addiction because that was still in my system. But I remember going to this detox facility with a sense of hope, a sense of I could have a second, I could have another chance here. And that's where I really felt the full brunt of that spiritual experience because I started reading books about spirituality, Eastern philosophy. I start meditating for the first time. I start befriending my body for the first time. I remember doing mindfulness for the first time. And the mindfulness teacher says, focus on your breath and your chest. And I says, I can't, I'm afraid of my chest. And she says, well, just focus on your nostril, the air coming in and out of your nostril. And says, well, I won't be able to, but I'll try. And I remember breathing in and breathing out and being able to keep my focus on my nostrils. And it was like a miracle. And that sort of began, and like it's so simple, but that was like a
It's so
miracle
cool.
for me because
Yeah, it's so
I was
simple,
so
but so
afraid
cool.
of my
Yeah.
body. And I remember over those weeks at that detox facility reading these books. And the only way I can describe it, Chris, was it was like the world began to glow. Everything seemed brighter, sound seemed cheerful. There was this beautiful little cat called Molly at the detox farm, and she'd crawl up my legs in the mornings as I was sitting on the fence, and I was just so present, so alive, so present, and I felt amazing. If I could go back to any time in my life, I'd go back to that moment.
Yeah,
Now,
that's so
physically,
interesting.
I had the fever. I was going through withdrawals, but psychologically, I felt so alive. It was a real conflict of speaking about an experience, but that for me right there, that was the real spiritual shift. The moment of acceptance opened me up to that. But this spiritual shift sort of happened in the weeks after that, and the world just seemed to glow. I think that's the best language I could put on it.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. So look, you're still a human being. You've done all these incredible things. When do you still feel that anxiety creep in every once in a while? And if so, how do you cope with it?
Yeah, so the reality is, right? Anxiety is not a bad thing. Stress is not a bad thing. These are biological mechanisms that are designed to protect us from the inevitable challenges of life. If I'm walking down the shops later on tonight and someone jumps out from behind a bush to mug me, I hope I get anxious pretty bloody quick because
Yeah,
that will give
really,
me the energy to
it's
fight
eustress, right?
or, yeah,
Eustress, eustress. It's good stress,
yes,
right? Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So it's important, but the thing is, like, imagine it turns out it was a little dog, right? Well, do I
Right.
walk down and calm down again and go back into balance and homeostasis, or do I go up into my head and say, oh, what about next time? Oh, maybe next time I will get moved. Now, maybe I shouldn't go out in the dark and ruminate and play on that, and that's what can happen to some people. So I want to stress that anxiety is not a bad thing. It's information, it's data. But so I still get anxious, of course I do. But my relationship with anxiety has changed. I have lots of different tools. I have lots of different strategies. I have people in my life. I don't have stressors in my life. I live clean. I don't take drugs. I sleep well. There's lots of good things in my life. But the lever that I use for anxiety, if it does come into my life, is breathwork techniques. And I sort of use neuroscientific mechanisms to slow down my heart rate. So the belief is the key. Whereas many, many years ago, if anxiety reared its ugly head, my belief was I can't cope. The consequence was
Right.
drugs. My belief today is I have a toolbox. I have a great relationship with anxiety. I'm going to swat it away with the tools I use. The consequence is I feel calmer after using the tools. So the toolbox has changed. My belief has changed. And I truly believe there's nothing really that can overwhelm me mentally today. And it's through practicing those tools.
Wow. So when you talk about I love that you kind of whittled down to breathing through the nostrils, because I know a lot of people have difficulty meditating, sitting still, quieting the monkey
Yeah.
brain type of thing. When you talk about breath work, I remember learning about Navy SEALs where they were like breathe in, they'd hold it, they call it box breathing, and then
Box
let it
breathe.
out,
Yeah.
and hold it at the
Yeah.
bottom. Is that the type of breath work that you're talking about in order to calm the anxiety, or do you have like a go-to that you use that you could share?
Yeah, so that's a lovely question because what's really important there is you've got to hold on dearly to what works for you. So for some
Right.
strange reason, I find box breathing. I wouldn't say I find it aversive, but I don't find it comfortable. I find it,
Mm,
would the word be a little bit suffocating because you're like holding your breath for 4 seconds. Now it works brilliantly for some people. I work with a young pro golfer here in Ireland to help him regulate his nervous system when he takes a bad shot. And he uses box breathing, so that works for him. For me, there's two things I use. One of them is just a vagus nerve breathing technique or belly breathing, but it's literally 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out. Now, the key for this is when we breathe in, air comes into our lungs, our diaphragm goes down, and it opens up the space around our heart center. When that space is opened up around our heart center, it reduces the blood pressure in the vessels, blood vessels in our heart. As a result, our body, our heart wants to go back into homeostasis. Our body always wants to go back into homeostasis. So the heart sends a signal up to the brain and says, we need to speed up the heart rate to increase the pressure. So breathe in increases your heart rate. When we exhale and the diaphragm comes up and squeezes the heart center, it increases the blood pressure in the vessels in the heart. The heart wants to get back into balance, sends a signal to the brain. We need to slow down the heart rate. So what we know is heart rate, breathing in speeds up the heart rate, breathing out slows down the heart rate. And if we're talking about stress or anxiety, if we're having a stress or anxiety response, our heart rate is increased to pump nutrients around the body to give us the energy for the fight and flight system, namely glycogen, glucose, and oxygen, to pump it into the muscles. So what we need to do is we need to have an ability to lower our heart rate. So I like to use breathing techniques that lower my heart rate, and simply 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out for a couple of breaths reduces your heart rate, makes you focus. And that's the go-to tool. There's another one called cyclic sign or the physiological sign that works great too. But just changing the ratio is absolutely key.
so beautifully put. My goodness, like your brain and the level of like your intellect, your ability to communicate what you experienced, how you experienced it, and how you're handling it is absolutely elegant. Are there, and I hope not, are there any remnant physical implications that you deal with today from the abuse you put your body through in the past?
No, I remember because I was taking so many drugs, Chris, and I remember thinking there's got to be damage. Like there has to be damage. And if you look at the research at a statistical level, so looking at a group level kind of stuff, there's atrophy in the brain, there's multiple different damage to the body. But the body is phenomenal at repairing itself. And I think I got there in time. I was 35 when I gave up. And I think when people get a little bit older and give up long-term drug use, there's a little bit more damage. Now, there could be damage to the body I don't know about. But what I do know is I live a very healthy lifestyle today. I exercise regularly. I love exercise. I eat clean. I sleep well. I have great people in my life. And I regularly test certain things in my life. Like I have a high VO2. I can lift good weights and stuff like that. So I have that physical strength, that physical ability. I know that's there. So I don't know of any challenges I had, but I remember my GP, my doctor telling me I was worried about this back in the day. And he says, imagine you're like a car driving at 100 miles an hour when you were in addiction. At any moment, you were in danger. You could have crashed and you could have burnt, but you've slowed down and now you're driving at 30 miles an hour. The danger is gone. Now, my
Mm.
worry is that engine was driving at 100 miles an hour for a long time. So maybe there is something there,
Yeah.
but I'm not, I don't worry about that, Chris. I don't. It doesn't even
Yeah.
come in. I think that's the essence of the acceptance of letting go. I don't even regret the missed years. I don't spend time in time. I spend time in the present moment. That's where I live in the moment as much as I can. And I think that's really key. But the one thing, one remnant from my past that still is there, the flavor of it is there. When I'm talking about the experience of the operation as a baby, I still have this little urge to rub the scar on my belly. So that's still there, that little remnant of trauma.
That's so crazy.
Crazy. Yeah, it
I mean, yeah, the body does keep the score, right?
really does. Yeah.
I mean, I have so many questions for you. We're gonna be here forever. So you mentioned that your three core values are health, relationships, and energy.
Yes.
What does that look like in a day-to-day basis, right? Like a lot of people will look at that, a lot of jaded people and be like, those are platitudes, health, relationships, and energy.
Yeah.
Sure, everybody wants health, they want great relationships, and they want to have energy. How do you make sure that those are remain your core values? And how do you I've heard some of the times that you're speaking, you're kind of challenging people like you need to have core values. How do you help people get to their core values as well?
Yeah, and I think one really important component of that is that the world is pulling us away from our values. And I think of this dichotomy between values-based decisions versus feelings-based decisions. Because the world is always trying to pull us off course. And take this morning, for example, right? I was at an event in Dublin city centre. It was to do with giving people that had been in prison jobs, great event. And I was going in, I was sketchy on time. I couldn't get to my own gym, but I wanted to go to the gym. It's good for my energy. It's good for my health. So I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was 10 to 6 in the morning. I went into a gym in the city centre before I went to the event. Now I felt like hitting the snooze button. I felt like staying in bed, but I didn't make a feelings based decision. I made a values based decision that aligns with my energy and aligns with my health. Now I usually do intermittent fasting because that's really good for my energy as well. But when I got out of the gym and I was going to this event, I felt like eating something before instead of doing intermittent fasting, even though I valued my energy. And today I gave in. Now I got a nice healthy protein bar, it's an all-real bar. So I'm not, it's not perfection every day, but I'm aware of those values-based decisions. And it's really a funny little anecdote of that. But I think the connection and the relationships piece is really, really key because like I'm getting some great opportunities in life today and lots of work opportunities. And it's like, great, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And what I've found is if I say yes to that, I'm probably saying no to my stepdaughter, my nephews, my partner. So it's really important to recognize, like people will say, oh yeah, I value my kids, I value my family, yet they're working 70 hours a week. So what do you really
Yeah.
value? So you've got to really have the awareness of what is important in your life. Like I think something else, I don't just have three values. I probably have about 12 or 13 different values. Inner peace is really important to me. So I practice being in the moment. I don't dwell and overthink things all of the time. So that would be a practice of that as well. And then I think something as well is like purpose, service to other people. So
I
that's
love
why I
that. Yeah,
went to that event today, even
sure.
though it didn't align with other things that I wanted to do. So you've got to recognize what's important to you so you can make decisions that go in that direction. And I think that's really crucial.
That's beautiful. And I think I feel like you don't preach anything that you're doing, which I find quite charming, frankly. It's like you've gone to hell and you've come back and you're not like, you got to do it this way. You're kind of like, hey, you find your way and you figure it out and you do what's best for you. I think, I'm a parent. I have a 17-year-old daughter who's a senior in high school looking at, where she's going to go to college next year. And I have a freshman in high school who's 14 years old. And when you say, that you were 16 the first time you tried heroin, I think any parent that's listening is like, "Ugh." Do you have any advice for parents about how to handle that with their teenagers? Or do you not even touch that? You're just kind of like, I wouldn't have known how to handle myself when I was 16 type of thing.
Yeah, like I don't want to be dissing my parents because they are amazing. They just didn't have the tools that they needed for me, I suppose, at that time. But what I would say, this really comes back to values, and this is something that we do in our house, like my partner or my stepdaughter. Like we don't talk that we have these values, but we have things that our family stand for, and it's being silly because it's with the kids. Like we're silly, we're honest, we're kind. This is what we do. but it's creating, I suppose, a space of vulnerability. If you can create a space of vulnerability that if your kids tell you something, you're not going to say, you should have done this, you should have done that. You create a safe space for your kids to talk about these things, create an honest space for your kids to talk about this thing. And you could even say, right, family crest. What is on our family crest? And that can be the values. We're honest. We respect each other. We're open. When we're in difficult times, we tell each other about it. So you're not waiting for the drug to rear its ugly head. You're waiting for the kid to tell you about something that could be challenging them then while they're 12, while they're 13 years of age. So you keep that communication open
Lines of
with them.
communication open.
They're, lo-
Yeah.
they, yeah, they've got to be open. And I think as well, like you can't change anybody, and it's very hard to control people's behavior. So you've got to model that behavior. But like I often get parents coming to me worried about their kids getting into addiction, and they probably have alcohol issues themselves, or they might be saying, how can I get my kid off the phone? They're a ball of anxiety. Well, they're a ball of anxiety on their phone. So you've got to model the behavior and be the person that you want your kid to become. So it's really what can control, what you say, what you do, how you respond to challenges. Focus on yourself to impact other people that you love. I think that's the key.
If somebody's listening to this and they've never really delved into any sort of self-help or done, this all started because I was running with my friend Emmett, who we bonded over fitness and, sharpening our axe is the best way I could say, reading
Yeah, I love
business
that.
books and how to get better. And what about somebody that doesn't really understand that, hasn't been exposed to that, their parents, their family, their culture, their ecosystem? What is it? You mentioned the Tao. Where do you think they should start? Like, what's the first book they should read? What's the first podcast they should listen to, other than yours, obviously, and this one? But like, do you
Yeah.
have any advice for that? Like somebody that's curious about it. Wow, this is interesting. I deal with anxiety. I always live in the past, or I always have anxiety about the future. How do I stay present? Where do they start?
My God, so many book recommendations here. I don't want to give too many out because people tend to, less is more, I often find. There's a concept that I think is key for people to think about, right? It's this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I think some people with a fixed mindset think their abilities, their skills, their talents are innate, and that's all you can ever have. But
Yeah.
that's not true. You can develop a growth mindset. You can change your brain. I've literally changed my brain. I have a scan of my brain when I was in addiction versus a scan of my brain now. It's changed so much. And that's through developing a growth mindset. You
Wait,
can
you
build
literally
skills.
have the two
Literally
scans?
have the scans. Yeah. I was in a brain study. I was in a brain study when I was in a detox and I got a scan of my brain. Yeah. I'll have
That's
to send you the
fascinating.
images. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. So not only can we develop new skills, we can change our brains through neuroplasticity. So it's an ability to remember, right? I can't do that yet. Just add that word on. I can't do that yet. And that is really key because when I went back to college, I couldn't write. Writing and public speaking now are my passions. I couldn't write and I couldn't do public speaking. I couldn't talk in public. So I've developed those skills over time through developing a growth mindset. But in terms of the books of a place to start, I'm going to say three books. Three books had a massive impact on my life. The first book that I read in Detox, it's a terrible, terrible title by Robin Sharma, but it's a great book. It's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. So it was basically this fella who had a Ferrari, sold it, and went to explore spirituality in the East. And there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. It's a brilliant, brilliant book.
That's cool. I've never heard
Another
of it.
book I read, it's excellent. It's an excellent book. Another book I read that was monstrous for me was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah,
And that
yeah, yeah.
helped me to discover the most important spiritual tool in my toolbox, and it's an ability to self-observe. So I've touched on it today. Like I practice acceptance, I practice being present. But what I practice more than anything else is an ability to observe my inner dialogue, my feelings, my bodily sensations. So it's no longer me. It's just thoughts that come and go, feelings that come and go, bodily sensations that come and go. So if they come and go, why am I going to get worried about them? I might be sad now, happy later. Everything is transient. Everything passes. So this ability to be the observer of your inner world rather than being fused to that is such a powerful thing to do. So that's an incredible book. But an American guy that was influential in my life, and a lot of people will heard of him, is Tim Ferriss. And
Yeah,
Tim
he's
Ferriss, yeah,
brilliant. Yeah.
He's unreal. And Tim Ferriss wrote a book called Tribe of Mentors. And this is a great book because it's basically the life advice from 130 of the most successful people on the planet, all across different disciplines. And there's 13 questions in that book that he asks each of these people. It's like, what do you say no to? What life advice would you give to a college student? If you had one message for the world, what would it be? Loads of little snippets from all these people. So there's loads of little great tidbits in there. But I remember what happened with me when I read that book. I was like, I'd love a tribe of mentors myself. And I emailed, guessed the names. I Googled the 25 most influential people, men in Ireland, and 25 most influential women in Ireland. And I guessed their emails based on their names and their companies to build a tribe of mentors. And 81% of those people got back to me, Chris. And I
Come
developed
on.
an army of mentors, an army of friends, customers. It has set the tone for that was 2017. And I'm so connected with these people now. But a key part of that, I was honest and I put my heart on a page. And that was the key. I didn't try to create this slick email. I think I said in the email, I'm a ridiculously enthusiastic learner and I was trying to help kids, which I genuinely was doing. I do skill talks today and I wanted to learn what they learned in their life so I can give it to other people. And it was authentic. It was honest. And I think that's why it worked. But so that book, Tribe of Mentors, had a massive impact on my life.
That's such a great story, man. So that's interesting because it's like there's a young man that started a business called Next Gen, and he's a Gen Z that's trying to help Gen Z interact with Generation X and Boomers in the work environment because it's difficult.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
he talks about mentorship and the power of mentorship. And I think it's like an undervalued thing in our society. And it's so critical and so important. I was lucky to have, mentors in my life, my father, my Uncle Bill, and family members that mentored me. So I guess, obviously seems important to you and has sustained, you've sustained these relationships with these people. Is that the recommendation for people that don't have mentors is like, hey, pick who you want, be genuine in your outreach and say, would you, give me some advice or spend time with me? Like, how do you interact with those mentors, those people that you connected with?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important to recognize is that like I've reached out to lots of people who didn't help me out or whatever like that, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't even know if they got the
Yeah.
emails, to be quite
Yeah.
honest.
Right.
And I think people often fear rejection. And from an evolutionary perspective, if you got rejected from the tribe, you're kicked out of the cave, you're dead. So
Yeah.
people fear rejection more than guns, which is quite crazy because guns can really kill you, that way.
Yeah.
So public rejection really hurts. But what I've learned from, and one of the people I reached out to, she was an actress in Ireland, Amy Huberman, her name is, and I says, I actually wasn't going to ask Amy. I thought you'd say no. And she says, sure, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I was like, oh, so I was pre-rejected. I only gave myself a fighting chance when I
I
actually
love that.
asked. And that was mind blowing for me. So what I would say is for people, reach out. Don't think about it as rejection if people don't get back to you. Maybe they didn't get the email. Maybe it wasn't the right fit. Or maybe it just wasn't the time. That
Yeah.
way. But what I would say is be authentic, be you. Because one thing I learned when I sent that email out to people, the biggest lesson I got from that was be true to your wonderfully weird self. You'll attract what you need and repel what you don't. And the people that vibed with that message, the true me, they have become my friends, that way. But the one core component I think where I really made strong mentorship and friendship through that was when I met them and got advice. And there was one mentor in particular, Mick Slane, his name is. We've gone on to be great friends. We meet every month. He says he gets more off me now than I get off him. It's the roles have reversed. He's
Cool.
a
Yeah.
phenomenal guy, phenomenal fella. But Mick says I went to him and he gave me six specific bits of advice. And he says, you called me up a week later and you said, I done that, I done that, I done that, I done that. Struggling with that. Can you give me a bit of advice? And he was like, oh my God, this fella does what he says he was going to do. That's so rare in today's world. And I've heard that of mentors that they give advice to people, but the people don't go and do. So if you get somebody giving you advice, you do it and you give feedback on what happened because people want to be valuable. They don't want to feel they're wasting their time. So that's the key. Be real, be you, but take action. That's the key.
I love that. Such practical, tactical advice, which is phenomenal. So we're talking about people like relationships in your life. Michelle, the teacher who accepted
Yeah.
you fully that you've talked about in the book.
Yeah.
What do you think she saw in you that you couldn't?
I don't know. The Gab when I had that interview with Gabor Mate, Gabor actually read me book, and he mentioned that Michelle as well, and he says that was the first time. I didn't realize that until he said it to me. That was the first time you were truly seen. And I
Mm.
remember Michelle. The only way I can describe it is she fully accepted me for who I was. And in the early days of my recovery, I wouldn't say I was manic in a bad way, but I was trying to make up for lost time. I wanted to learn and I wanted to learn quick. And we had a laugh, we had a bit of crack, but she embraced me, my curiosity and everything that went with it. And we just really bonded. Like we'd end up going in. She was thinking I'll get into trouble just laughing with students for an hour. Like, you know what I mean? We just got on, we had so much fun. And it was just easy. It was just easy.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it. But I think she's seeing me for who I was. And I think for many people in life, if you're not seen and you're not heard, that's a hard place to be. And I think that's one of my core basic needs. I think it's one of many people's core basic needs. But addiction takes you into a space where you're not seen, you're not heard, and you're not visible. So all of a sudden, I came out of addiction, I found education, and I began fulfilling a need of mine in terms of curiosity. But I started to get seen by special people in my life. And Michelle was one of them.
So cool. It's your story is so fascinating. I'm like, we're talking about people in modern day and they're trying to stay present and within the moment and be able to, follow up and do what they say with mentors and things of that nature. When you go and you speak to executives or you're keynoting an event or, you're doing workshops with a massive company, do you talk about modern distractions like phones and devices? Is that something that you're seeing as a doctor now with your PhD and the study of the brain that you're doing now? Do you find that to be, one of the biggest hurdles that we have as human beings is to like put the phone down and not deal with that dopamine release in our brains?
Yeah, it's definitely a big one. And I wouldn't just say it's the phones. I think the phones specifically, not in the corporate arena. I just think in general in households,
Yeah.
adults, kids on their phones. And like we have the best computer scientists in the world hooking up with neuroscientists, hijacking the reward systems of our brains to keep us on technology for as long as possible. Like these things are designed to keep us on technology. And they burn a hole in your brain, metaphorically speaking. They
Yeah.
really do. It is not good for you. But I think the biggest challenge with phones is it's not so much the time you spend on screen, it's what are you not doing that you would have done if you weren't on the screen? Like kids aren't learning
I
how to
like that.
play properly, to communicate, to argue, to debate. We're losing these basic skills and there's just this disconnection. And I think there's an artifact from COVID as well, where in the workplace they have the phone problems obviously as well, but all of a sudden there's hybrid working. There's no context shift where they're going home and they're going into home mode from work mode. Everything's getting melded into one and we're always on all of the time. And I think it's a huge challenge. Like, I'll go back to it again. I think awareness is the catalyst for change. And I think people nearly need to wake up to being a slave to the tech industry, to the world, to their jobs, like as well. We can be contacted at any moment of the day, potentially by 8 other billion people on the planet. Like, that's not normal. There's an evolutionary mismatch where our
You
bodies
can't
and
handle it.
brains, we can't handle it. Our bodies and brains are not designed for the world we live in today. So this is a big challenge. I talk about this evolutionary mismatch a lot. And we really need to unplug. We need to switch off. We need to go back to basics. I read another great book recently by Michael Easter called The Comfort Crisis. And he says we're living in a crisis of comfort. Like with cars with heated seats and heated steering wheels. We drive everywhere. There's escalators, there's scooters. We call for our food. We don't even get the kids to go to the door. Like we're living in this sedentary lifestyle. And that's a huge problem as well. Technology is great, but it's stopping us from doing the things we used to do to keep us healthy, to keep us present. And it's just not good for our bodies or our minds. It's really not.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I love that. It's like, and it's almost on weekends, I like to take my dog hiking. and that feels weird. Like I'm in the woods and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, it's
Yeah.
beautiful out here. Why did I get stuck in that office? I have a lot of toys in my office, so I get stuck in here.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I play my guitar, do whatever. But yeah, getting outside is a big one.
Get a
So
dog. That's great. Get a
yeah,
dog.
get a
Yeah.
dog. Yeah, that's good
Yeah.
advice. So I know Bonus Time was written a while ago, and you are someone that is obviously living your life with this ravenous energy that's, this source energy that's coming from the inside of you. Talk to us about Hooked and how you're changing your national conversation in Ireland about addiction, and how did that come to be? People that don't have access to watching it in the United States, is there a potential that we'll be able to get something like that? And what happens? I was going to say if Netflix calls, but when Netflix calls, like what's the
Yes, I
next
like
step
that.
in that regard?
Yeah, so that was great doing the documentary because hopefully we're looking to get international rights at the moment so we can launch Hooked internationally. And it was really it came to fruition. So I launched my own podcast, Change is Possible, there a couple of weeks ago. And I have a guy on the podcast called Noel Breslin. His name is Brezzy. He's this God, he's nearly too good to be true. He's like 6'6". He's a musician. He was a sports person. He was a model. He's so smart. He's just finishing his PhD at the moment. It's like, would you stop? Would you stop, man?
Wow.
He's like, yeah, he just has everything. But he's a lovely guy. But he went through incredible mental health challenges as well. And me and Brezzy were going to write a book several years ago. And he was a TV personality in Ireland at the time. Like he was on like the equivalent of The Voice, like America's
Yeah.
Got Talent, the Irish equivalent. And he sort of had a little bit of pulling power. And we were going to write a book together. And we went to the TV studios. This would have been 2019, maybe 2018. And he talked to the producer called Aoife Stokes. And Aoife just heard my story. The book never came to fruition. He done a podcast instead, a great podcast instead. And the TV show never came into fruition. But a woman called Aoife Stokes, something just percolated in her mind. She loved my story. Aoife went back to have a couple of kids, but came back to the film industry 2 years ago, and she wanted to do something on addiction. So she got in contact with me. We got funded from Science Foundation Ireland, and we wanted to make a series about addiction. But it was really about destigmatizing addiction because people think that addiction is a choice. Addiction is not a choice. Like if you've had trauma, if you've come from an environment that creates challenges and pain and a reality that's so painful, and you're given a drug to temporarily escape that pain, you're going to take it.
You're gonna take it, yeah.
And one of the core principles of psychology, a really powerful, robust principle of psychology, is behavior that's rewarded is repeated. And a big reward is taking away your pain. That will be repeated. So addiction is not a choice. And I really wanted to break down the idea that it's biological as well. The biology plays a role, but not much of a role. It's environmental. It really is. So that was the core goal of that. But a big goal of mine, as you know, I love reaching out to people further along the path. Oldness is another core value of mine, Chris, as well. So
Yep.
I decided to reach out to two of my heroes, Dr. Gabor Amate, who I've name dropped twice already, and Professor Anna Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation. And we got them on the documentary. I met Gabor in London. People can watch we done a bonus episode with Gabor called the Gabor Mate interview. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you see the Gabor Mate interview there. It's an hour-long interview with me and Gabor. But that was just an incredible experience. And we had 1 million people over 3 episodes tune in Ireland, which was amazing numbers.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think we really made a dent in the narrative around addiction. Like I had a 74-year-old woman come up to me last week saying it changed. She was in recovery 4 years, but she said when she seen the documentary 6, 7 months ago, something shifted. She realized it was a traumatic experience. It was a really horrific sexual abuse thing happened to her when she was younger, but she had a release of energy and she took me hand and held me hand, just thanking me. So having moments like that is just absolutely beautiful. You're making like
Amazing.
concrete change in someone's life, it's just beautiful.
That's unreal. So you have Changes Possible. Can you talk a little bit more about Changes Possible, and what's the vision for, like, what's the mission for Changes Possible?
Yeah, so change is possible. That was my first ever blog. I started blogging in 2017 and I wrote Change is Possible, Here's How. And it was all about self-observation, what I talked about earlier on, that awareness being the catalyst for change. But I've created my business. I've developed programs and I do corporate speaking. I go around the world and it's called Change is Possible. That's the business. So I had to call my podcast Change is Possible. And I think what it stands for is that change is hard. It's really bloody hard between our brains and our psychology and our ego and our identity and our false sense of self and our unwillingness to go into discomfort. Change is really hard, but it is possible. My own story is an example of that. So, what I'm doing in the podcast, I'm bringing people on that have been through challenges in their life but have come through it. It's the hero's journey, really. So, I start the podcast. Every episode is started with tell me about the most challenging moment of your life. And we just go from there. We just go on a conversation from there and look at the tools that they use to create change in their lives. And I'm having a blast with it. I really am.
I love it. So you talk about addiction being, essentially people trying to temper discomfort, right? Like whether that be anxiety or trauma. If you had all the money in the world and you were attempting to reduce modern addiction, where do you start? What's the first thing that you would do?
I would reduce the unmet needs, the basic unmet needs of people. Like when you think of the people that are struggling with addiction, the majority, now addiction crosses all borders and all social classes, but the crux, the majority of people in addiction come from underprivileged backgrounds. Like they need a hug, they need human connection, they need shelter, they need food. These basic needs are not being met. And it comes from poverty. It comes from a lack of resources. It comes from inequality. So that would move the needle so much that if the billionaires of the world spread their wealth and people's basic needs were met and people weren't sort of trying to take all of the money, that's the magic lever you tried to pull.
You know what I love, Brian? I don't even think you realized it, but the first thing you said was you started with a hug.
I didn't
Isn't it?
realize
But
that.
isn't it? I find that fascinating,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
that lines up with what you're talking about, right? It's just like a hug, like that
bloody
could
hug.
temper that anxiety and soothe
Yeah.
somebody. I think that that's a beautiful message. You're doing a lot of great things in Ireland and speaking to some very influential people. What gives you hope about the young people of Ireland that you've been interacting with when you're speaking and you're doing all these things?
Yeah, I think that's a subject that we forget to talk about because we often talk about the phones and the challenges that the young people face. But I think there's a boldness about the young people. Like when you look at, they're willing to speak their truth. They're willing to step out of their comfort zone. Not all of the time, but sometimes to speak out, and that can be a challenge in itself. Sometimes the pendulum goes too far in one direction as well. But there's definitely hope with this younger generation. It's really tough for the younger generation between the internet, social media, phones, and all of the challenges, the industries
Distractions,
today that are
yeah.
trying to pull us off course to sell their products. Like it's really challenging in that way. But I definitely think there is evidence of pushback from the youth of today. And I think there's a growing interest. I do a lot of talks in schools and I'm seeing over time, even over the last 5 or 6 years, they're much more open to these ideas, even ideas around personal health and personal fitness and personal development. So I think we're waking up to a certain extent. Whereas I think it was Eckhart Tolle that put it best. He says there's two big forces in the world. One is being driven by ego, power, and greed. And the other one is more people are waking up through trauma and pain. Well, who's going to win? We don't know. There's more people waking up, but the greed and the war and the pain is happening at the same time. So we're just hoping, and I think it could be the young people of today that could be the big domino that could really knock down the other dominoes and make that real change. So I've big hope for the young people of today. I really have in the world
That's
and
so
Ireland.
cool. Yeah, I love that. When to the person that's lost hope, that if they're hearing this, they're just like, well, that's your story, Brian. Like, I don't have
Yeah.
the strength to do that. And you're obviously so smart. I'm not that smart. Like, what do you say to someone that's like too tired to have hope, that's just gotten the junk kicked out of them?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think people like it's a mindset thing as well. Like I think people say, well, I'm not good enough. That's great for him. I can't cope with those challenges. And really, we are the stories we tell ourselves and believe. Like our belief system and what we think about ourselves is so powerful. So
Mhm.
what I would say to these people, ask yourselves, is that really true? Or is this a
Mm.
narrative that your brain is trying to come up with to keep you in the comfort zone? You
I
know?
love that you just said that. There's a book that I'm reading that they here it is, Martha Beck, The Way of Integrity, and literally says that. Like,
No way.
the exercise is to ask yourself, is that really true? Is that really true?
Is that really
And if you
true?
ask
You
the
know?
second time, it's like, no, not
Yeah.
really true. Yeah, it's so
I
so
I I heard a great story. I have to tell you this story, Chris, right? So it was in the start of another brilliant book by Anthony DeMello called Awareness, one of my favorite books. But Anthony DeMello talks about this story of this farmer walking onto his farm, and this eagle's egg had fallen out of the tree, and he couldn't get the egg back up into the tree, so we put it into his chicken coop. So the little eagle, a few days later, hatched, looked around the chicken coop, thought he was a chicken. Obviously, I must be a chicken. So
yeah,
we
must
start
be.
copying the other chickens, scratching the earth like a chicken, clucking like a chicken, flapping his wings like a chicken. He just believed he was a chicken. So months went by, years went by. This little eagle thought he was a chicken. And then one day, this golden eagle was soaring through the sky, and he looks up and says, "Oh, what's that?" And the other chickens, the older chickens, were like, "God, that's the eagle, the king of the skies. But we're just lowly chickens. We belong to the earth, and this is all we will ever be." And there's no happy ending. The little eagle died thinking he was a chicken. Now, what Anthony DeMello, it's a tragic story. What Anthony DeMello was trying to say is that so many people in the world are eagles, but they think they're chickens. Their beliefs, their limiting beliefs, negative self-talk, they don't question their potential and what they could actually do. And I remember hearing this story and thinking, I've lived in a drug-riddled chicken coop for long enough. I want the bloody soar. I want to be an eagle. So what I'd say to people is, ask yourself, is it really true what you say about yourself? What limiting beliefs are holding you back? And there is some facts over time, but develop that growth mindset. Yeah, maybe I can't cope with that right now, but I will learn. Take baby steps. I think that's a really important thing for people to think as well. Like, we're looking for the quick fix. We're looking for that big change really quickly. Big change doesn't happen quickly. I'm 12 years in recovery. I couldn't write. I couldn't talk, do speaking events. I learned slowly over time, but I opened up to the idea that maybe it can be me. Maybe I can change. Maybe I could do this. I disputed my belief system and tried to do it another way. So what I would say to people is to give, if they want to just try to have a little bit of hope, just question your current belief system and ask yourself, is it really true? And that's a great starting point.
So powerful just to ask that one silly question. My goodness. So, I mean, look, you've done so much. I want you to be able to, I want to give you the stage to talk about the great things that have happened since you wrote the book Bonus Time. And I'm very curious if there's another book in you as well. I want to hear about that. But before that, I want to say when your loved ones, very bunch of years from now, stand over your grave, beyond all the titles, the accolades, the TV, the podcast, etc., what do you hope they whisper about the man that you became?
I heard a great definition of hell one time, Chris, that the person you became on your last day on earth, the person you became meets the person you could have become. Imagine that. And I think of the person that was in addiction. Imagine I died, but on my last day I met the person I'm becoming now. You know, it's a great
Mm.
definition. But what would they say about me? And it's interesting. Do you know what comes to mind? And it's something that I don't fulfill now. Other things come to mind. I'm loyal, I'm kind, I do my best, I'm accountable. But I'd like them to say he gave us his time, his presence, and his energy. And I try to give us, it's getting the balance on that. And I think of young kids in your life. All they want is your time and your presence. That's all they bloody want. It really is. Someone said to me recently, they also want your money, and maybe that's true. I'd like for people to be able to say, overarchingly, he was there for me when I needed him to be there for me. And that's what I want my loved ones to be able to say about him. And that includes my time, my presence. And I'm really trying to pull back on work to spend more time with the people I love. And it aligns with my values again. Like, yeah, I value my work, but I value my relationships more. And I need to do a little bit more. I need to spend a little bit more time doing less work and more time with people in my life. That's something I'm trying to leverage right now.
Love that. The first time you and I spoke on a call similar to this, you were in a hotel room and your dad was in the room with you.
Yeah, he just slotted into view. It was so funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Talk to me. Like, I'm curious about that relationship today as compared to what it was when you were living with your addiction. How has that
I,
changed?
yeah, do you know what? That's changed massively, even from the early stages of recovery to the latter stages of recovery. Can I just say, first and foremost, my family have been the rocks that have allowed my recovery to become what it was. This unconditional support and unconditional love just gave me those foundations. And the funny thing was, like, I was on this pink, fluffy cloud going back to college. Life was great in early recovery, but they were still dealing with the scars and the pain that I brought. So they nearly had it more difficult than me in a funny way. But over time, we are so close now. Like there was a lot of addiction in my family. My sister was an alcoholic. My brother was a cocaine addict. Both of them are in recovery now. My mom and dad don't drink anymore. So there's been so much recovery in the family and so much connection. Like we're so tight. We're so close today. But a challenging relationship I had. My dad, he was a taxi driver for years and he'd be very negatively minded, talking about politics, giving out about traffic and it can get on your nerves, this negative mindset. And I really struggled to have a relationship with him in early recovery. But I remember I'd go in and have a conversation. He'd bring up something political. He'd get angry and I'd get angry. We'd have a row and I'd walk out and I'm like, how is this happening? And I remember thinking, right, I can't change my dad, but I can change my response to the situation. So what I done was I remember I start practicing presence. I start practicing breath work before we had conversations. I start practicing empathy. I start standing in his shoes. And over time, we've changed that relationship. And I was up in Donegal in Ireland that day when I was talking to you on the phone. And when I'm doing talks around the country in Ireland, my dad comes with me. And it gives purpose to his life. Again, he's working with me, but we spend time together. My dad's 77 now today. He's retired. But it's great because like I wouldn't have been able to do that many, many years ago. But again, it wasn't like me trying to get my dad to change. We can't change other people. I changed my response of how I reacted to that situation, and then organically our relationship has changed. So it's really important. You've got to bring it back to you. You always have to bring it back to you. You can't change other people. How are you responsible for what's going on?
It's so beautiful and what a great message. Yeah, instead of saying like how am I going to change the people around me, it's like
Yeah.
do that inner work first and then the world opens up and then you end up getting bonus time with
Bonus
your
time.
dad.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Will there be a follow-up to bonus time? Because we kind of joked about it in our first conversation, but like you found love, you've done all these different
Yeah.
things, you're traveling the
Yeah.
world. Like, talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think I wrote the book too early, Chris. I should have waited until I got my PhD, fell in love, bought a house, really reconnected with the family, met Gabor, done the
Yeah,
TV doc, got
I was gonna
a
say the Gabber thing, that's
great
so cool. Yeah.
external successes.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I always like I've developed a whole I call it my program for life. I developed it for myself to navigate my world, and it really worked for me. And this is what I go around delivering around the world now today. This program that I've developed over time. But I think there's too many self-help books in the world. I think that genre is really saturated, and I'd love to write a novel, a fictional story that
Oh,
is
that's cool.
exciting, that's interesting, based on incredible characters I've met in my life. But I want to embed my program for life within that novel. And it mightn't be necessarily people coming out looking brilliantly. It might be a tool that someone tried to use, but they failed and they died or something. I don't know what's going to happen. I was only thinking about that book this morning. I was only taking notes on that book this morning, which is interesting. It's going to be a few years. I have a lot of stuff to do in the meantime, but it's percolating in my mind. But it's nearly like something that keeps people embedded and engrossed in the story and take messages along the way. But to be real as well, it's got to be real. It's got to be gritty as well. I think the best stuff is real and gritty. Like The Wire is my favorite program of all time. What a program. It's the grittiness and rawness of that makes it come alive.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great way to get the message through instead of like jamming it down somebody's face and saying you have to
Yeah.
change this way. It's like to weave it into a story.
Yeah.
I am curious though, bonus time, like I think I read it in like a day and a half, and it's not small, but it was so
No,
well written.
80,000 words. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, you wrote them. You know exactly how many. The friend that I gave it to, and I think I sent you the screenshot of our conversation from like
You
20
did.
to like 2020, where he was like, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down. Had you written before? Like, had you
I
ever, like, were
blogged.
you? an aspiring
Yeah.
writer? Like, so you were blogging when you were still using?
No, God, no, no. I started blogging in 2017. I went back to do my primary degree in college and then I started my PhD, but I started blogging around that time as well. I actually got invited into a mastermind group of these American writers. It was like Medium.
Cool.
Do you ever read Medium articles?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
Medium is
yeah,
the
absolutely. I
platform, a
write on
blogging
Medium. Yeah,
platform. And
yeah,
some of the best writers at the time, like Nick Gogay, Michael Thompson, so some of the best writers on Medium, I got invited into this group, and these all had like 100,000 followers, 200,000 followers on Medium.
sure.
I had 78. But the founder of the mastermind group loved me story and invited me in. So that sort of developed into this love of writing, and I start writing blogs, and then just I just got this love to write. And then I was gonna write the story, and I remember at the start sort of struggling to write the story. And Lynn Rowan, who was a good friend of mine, is also on my podcast, Senator Lynn Rowan, I should say. She has her own journey and her own story. I remember her telling me, Brian, just speak your truth,
Mm.
like the uncensored truth. And I says, I'm going to put everything into that book, the gritty, the raw, the real, everything's going to go into it. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to paint pictures in people's minds to bring them into the room where I was. And that's something that I really tried to do. And I remember I went down to Cork to a writing centre in Cork called Anam Cara, West Cork in Ireland. And I done my first two chapters and I liked them, but I didn't love them. So I scratched them and I started it again with this idea of painting pictures in people's minds. And something really shifted within that. I just love the craft. I love the art of trying to drag people into the story. And it just became a real love affair with Ryan.
Well, that's a tough thing to do, to scrap the first two chapters. I think Stephen King calls it
Yeah.
"kill your
Kill
darlings,"
your
right?
darlings.
Kill
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
darlings. That's not easy to
It's
do,
hard. It's
man.
like chopping an arm off. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So, look, we could probably sit here for 5 hours with all the questions that I have for you, but I think your story is so important. I think it's not only a great story, but it's so important today. So I feel like young people are dealing with a lot and are being inundated by different things. And I think you're literally doing God's work. Like you really are, like
Appreciate
going
that,
out
Chris. Thank you.
and preaching this gospel and pushing people to look internally and not to point fingers externally. And I think I've enjoyed interacting with you, and I've loved every part of the book. And I think I hope a lot of people have an opportunity to see this podcast. But I'm going to give you the opportunity as we kind of sign off here. What's the last message that you want to communicate to anybody that's watching?
The last message, God, I don't know. There's the one thing, I think the world is just so fragmented at the moment. I think
Mhm.
that's the biggest challenge. The world is just so fragmented. And I think what people have to do really is just to really connect, to create that deep connection with people, because the connections that's out there, it's just so shallow. To create that deeper connection with people and make the effort. Like people are just so busy. So what I'd say is like even just random acts of kindness. Call a friend you haven't talked to for a while. Smile to a stranger. There's so many homeless people in Dublin. I'm sure it's in parts of America as well. Go and talk to that homeless person in the street. Just random acts of kindness, of that human connection. I just think we need more of that, because I think that's what we're losing in today's modern world.
Yeah, I agree with it. Brian Penny, author of Bonus Time, founder of Change is Possible. What's the URL that people could find out more about you? Is
Yeah, just brianpenny.com. All one word, brianpenny.com. That's the link. Or Instagram, same brianpenny78, giving away my age there.
My man, this has been a joy. I thank
It was
you
an absolute
from the
privilege,
bottom of
Chris.
my heart. I know
Thank
you've
you.
got a million things to do, and this was probably the last thing on your agenda. And I thank you. I really hope that we have an opportunity to meet in person in the spring at the Quantum Shift
Hopefully
Summit.
so. That would be
If I
great.
could pull
That
that
would be
off,
great.
hopefully. Yeah, we'd love to
Yeah,
get you on a plane and have you come hang out in New York. That'd be super cool.
that'd be very cool.
But in the interim, man, keep up the good work. That's me, that phrase means a lot to me. Those were my father's last words to me. It was keep up the good work, and
Keep up
keep
the
up the
good
good
work.
work, my man. Keep up the good work.
I like that. Appreciate it. I'm right back at you, Chris. There's loads of people doing great work in the world, and you're one of them as well. So appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brian. You're the man.
Take
This
care.
is awesome. Damn, so cool.